Hello and welcome to all. Ever since school became compulsory, pop quizzes and exams have always been the worst fear of students. Whether it's for a BTS or a baccalaureate, or even for a simple math test, we have to admit that the pressure to bear is often enormous for the poor students. But in South Korea, country of Samsung and Squid Game, the annual Suneung exam is literally a matter of life and death. Because in this country, which has become a major industrial and technological hub in Asia, the quest for social success is pushed to the limit, so much so that it is not uncommon to hear 5-year-olds discussing their professional future. And in order to get into the best universities in the country, the only guarantee of access to a privileged school and professional status, the Suneung is, so to speak, an indispensable step. So make yourself comfortable, because today we are going to discover the terrible Suneung, which many consider as the most difficult and crucial exam in the world. Let's get started. Since the independence of South Korea after World War II, its educational system has improved significantly over time and generations. The country, which has meanwhile become the 10th economic power in the world, has indeed had to adapt to its institutions in order to meet its new requirements and responsibilities. After many reorganizations and other notable changes in both form and content, the South Korean education system has finally opted for a strict, state-supervised education. The latter has thus chosen to make education a real national priority, since it is the only guarantor that will allow the training of tomorrow's elites. It is therefore not surprising that the educational system in South Korea is one of the most difficult and busy in the world. And the competition between students is also the toughest, because every parent would like their children to have the best grade at school, even if it means investing tens of thousands of euros. Because when you talk about high-quality education, you have to talk about tutoring, and in South Korea, this is a market that generates millions of euros every year. They are called hagwons, a kind of private institute where teachers give tutoring to students for huge fees. These accelerated classes can often go on until very late at night, taking away from the sleep of the poor students. South Korean students have to study almost 50 hours a week or more to keep up with the infernal pace of their schooling. The latter start their day of classes at 8 o'clock, and most of them will not finish it around midnight or even later. From 9:30 p.m. onwards, there is an endless procession of special school buses which take the students to their respective hagwons, where they will then start their second shift of classes. This means that young South Koreans have to endure more than 15 hours of study every day, which greatly impinges on their basic needs for sleep and free time and leisure. This quasi-military system is supposed to prepare children for one of the hardest and most unaffordable exams in the world, the famous Suneung. This entrance exam for South Korean universities is the ultimate pass for students to get into the most prestigious universities. It is literally the most important test in the life of a young South Korean, and it is almost a rite of passage that will allow you to be valued or the opposite. It will only depend on your results. The Suneung is a test that will indeed determine the professional and social future of young South Korean students. In order to be able to access a notable and profitable position in one of the country's leading multinationals tomorrow, it is in their best interest to graduate from one of these most fashionable universities in South Korea. Referred to by the acronym SKY, these three prestigious universities, Seoul National University, Korea University, and Yonsei University, are indeed the most sought-after institutions for students. And pursuing their higher education in one of the SKY universities is literally like reaching the firmament for them. But in order to get there, you'll have to have the best grades in Suneung. And you will see that even if you work 7 days a week and 16 hours of classes daily, the task is far from easy. Because this final exam is absolutely hard and includes a lot of subjects and topics. The Suneung is spread out over a whole day, starting at 8:30 a.m. and ending at 5:30 p.m. to the great harassment of the poor examinees. Of course, they should not bring any documents or electronic devices with them, nor even food or snacks, because eating could distract the other participants. The test itself is a multiple choice test, or MCQ, usually including subjects such as Korean, mathematics, English, Korean history, and social studies or vocational education, and finally, a foreign language of choice. The content of the test is based on South Korean textbooks, but the scenery surrounding the questions on the test is of a state-secret nature. The teachers in charge of developing these questions are literally isolated from the rest of the world for a month, housed in the greatest secrecy in Gangwon province, and paid handsomely for their work. The secrecy is such that the teachers chosen to elaborate the MCQ Suneung must not reveal anything to their families or friends and justify their 1-month absence by a holiday abroad. It is therefore hidden from all eyes that the group of hand-picked teachers will begin the elaboration of this terrible exam, which remains the sacred grail for the majority of young South Korean students. And it must be said that the sacredness of this test is such that the whole South Korean nation is put in turmoil on the D-Day, with the mobilization of the police and even the military. Usually so noisy, like all Asian megacities, South Korean cities are transformed into true havens of peace, where silence reigns almost as an absolute master. Even the aeronautical traffic is suspended in some places, especially in the airports close to the examination centers, where planes are simply forbidden to take off or land. This ban also concerns military aircraft, such as fighter jets that are supposed to protect the country's borders, which, by the way, is still in a state of conflict with its neighbor, North Korea. But on the roads too, it is almost the same thing, since large trucks and heavy goods vehicles, as well as public transport, including trains and subway trains, are ordered to drive at reduced speed and not to honk their horns. In Seoul, as in other major cities in South Korea, construction sites have been put on hold, and department stores and small shops have drastically reduced their activities in order to avoid noise and traffic jams. Everything is being done to ensure that the Suneung will take place in the best possible conditions and that no student will be distracted or unable to access the exam centers for any reason. In most South Korean cities, a cab service is provided for the students, and the city police officers escort the latecomers with their beeper and flashing lights. The parents, meanwhile, will be praying in the temples and churches of the city, hoping to support their dear children spiritually in the face of this ultimate test. Most of them have indeed sweated blood and water to enroll their children in the hagwons, which are very often almost unaffordable, even going into debt or mortgaging their houses to pay the school fees. In fact, in South Korea, there are private tutors who have become millionaires overnight, simply by working in these private institutes. And when the calm returns after the storm and the terrible ordeal of the Suneung is finally over, the students do not hesitate to stomp on their books and textbooks in a frenzy of jubilation and feelings of intense deliverance. And they have a lot to be happy about indeed, because at least 70% of them will get into university, although only 2% of students will go to the famous sky. And for the poor, unfortunate ones who won't pass the test, they will have to wait another year to try to catch up with the Suneung, with all that implies in terms of hard study and expensive private lessons. Faced with such pressure and such a titanic amount of work, young South Koreans are exposed to real psychological, physical, and physiological damage. Most of the poor students suffer from chronic sleep disorders due to the considerable shortening of their rest time. Added to their flagrant lack of sleep, there is also the enormous pressure that weighs on their frail shoulders from society and especially from their parents. Because these parents will literally focus all their children's existence around one and only goal: to get the Suneung with the best grades to be able to access the sky. And as we have seen that only 2% of the students will finally have this chance, we let you imagine the impact that this will have on those who will not have succeeded in being admitted. Because you may not know it, but the poor South Korean students are the ones who suffer the highest stress rates of all developed countries. Even worse, the country of quiet mornings has the sad reputation of having the highest suicide rate among teenagers. A very sad record that South Korea could have done without, and which contributes to the very low demographic index of the country. Because it is literally a real hecatomb that is raging among young people who do not hesitate to simply put an end to their existence when they fail the Suneung or when they do not manage to integrate one of the 3 universities of the sky. These tragedies are repeated every year, plunging hundreds of South Korean families into mourning as soon as the fateful Suneung tests are over. Depression, sometimes severe and chronic, is also common among young people and requires in most cases psychological follow-up on the very long term. Thus, the Suneung, which was initially intended to be the ultimate guarantee of success in the South Korean school system, has turned out to be a real nightmare for the poor students who have not asked for anything. These young children are literally robbed of their childhood, to the detriment of an education that is meant to be avant-garde and particularly efficient, the only guarantee for social and professional success. But even with the hellish rhythm of life, while often depriving themselves of sleep and rest, and this for almost 12 years, the probability of passing this crucial exam remains very vague and uncertain. And even if you pass it and get the best grades, nothing is really guaranteed. Because even if you pass your studies with flying colors in one of the 3 sky universities, the chances of getting a prestigious and well-paid job in one of the country's mega companies remain very slim. Don't forget that the competition is extremely tough between fresh graduates and the thousands of other applicants who are already in a job market in crisis. The probability for a young graduate to get hired at Samsung or in one of the other gigantic structures of the country remain indeed very exiguous. What's the point of spending most of one's childhood, wasting the best moments of one's life, if it's to end up facing a world of ruthless competition? The young South Koreans are the only victims of this educational system and of this deleterious environment of competition and rivalry, which leaves very little time to enjoy life. And that's it for today. What do you think of the terrible Suneung final exam that most South Korean students have to undergo at the expense of their mental and physical health? Do you really think this is worth the risk, and that the academic ordeal of these poor students is justified by the social and professional success they may have later on? Tell us in the comments, and if you like this video, don't forget to put a like and subscribe and activate the notifications. See you soon for new discoveries out of the ordinary.